Don't forget to like the video, share your thoughts in the comments, and subscribe to stay updated with our latest stories. The house always felt a little too quiet after our daughter, Emily, left for college last fall. Tom, my husband, bless his heart, is a creature of habit. Evenings usually meant him settled in his recliner with the sports channel, me with a book or scrolling through recipes I'd probably never make. Comfortable, yes, but predictable. So, when Tom mentioned his cousin Mark was coming to stay for the weekend, I felt a flicker of something, maybe not excitement, exactly, but certainly disruption. Mark wasn't family we saw often. Tom talked about him fondly, recalling boyhood summers spent fishing and getting into scrapes, but I'd only met him a handful of times, mostly at large family gatherings years ago. He lived out on the West Coast, worked some sort of tech job I didn't fully understand, and seemed, from what I remembered, a bit more intense. Or maybe just different from Tom's side of the family, who were mostly salt-of-the-earth Midwesterners like us. Tom assured me Mark was just passing through on a cross-country drive, needing a place to crash for a couple of nights. "It'll be fun, Sarah," he'd said, clapping me on the shoulder. "Break up the routine." I smiled and agreed, pushing down a vague sense of apprehension. It wasn't that I disliked Mark. I barely knew him. It was more about disrupting our carefully curated quiet, our comfortable predictability. Friday evening rolled around, gray and drizzly, the kind of weather that makes you want to curl up on the sofa. I'd made my signature lasagna, the kind Tom loves, enough to feed an army or at least one extra guest. Headlights swept across the living room window just after 7. Tom jumped up eager while I smoothed my apron, taking a deep breath. The man who walked in wasn't quite the vague memory I held. The intervening years had been kind to Mark. He still had that lean frame, but his dark hair was now threaded with distinguished silver at the temples, and his eyes, a startlingly clear blue, held a depth, a sort of quiet thoughtfulness I hadn't recalled. He wasn't conventionally handsome like Tom, who has that sturdy, reliable appeal, but there was an undeniable magnetism about him. He greeted Tom with a warm hug and a booming laugh that filled the quiet house, then turned to me. "Sarah, it's great to see you again. Thanks so much for having me." His handshake was firm, his gaze direct but kind. He complimented the house, the smell of the lasagna, managing to sound sincere rather than merely polite. Dinner was pleasant. Mark and Tom easily fell back into reminiscing, sharing stories I'd mostly heard before but enjoyed hearing again, through Mark's slightly different perspective. He had a way of telling a story, adding small, observant details that brought the past vividly to life. I noticed he listened just as intently as he spoke, asking Tom questions about his work, about Emily, his eyes thoughtful. He asked me about my gardening, remembering a comment I'd made years ago at a wedding about my prize-winning roses. I was surprised he recalled it. We talked about Emily's first semester, the adjustments, the calls home that were becoming slightly less frequent. Mark listened patiently, nodding, offering a perspective not just as a cousin, but as someone who seemed genuinely interested. He didn't offer platitudes. He shared a brief story about his own early career struggles, the feeling of being adrift, making me feel understood in a way I hadn't expected. As I cleared the plates, Tom already yawning and eyeing his recliner, Mark insisted on helping. We stood side by side at the sink, the clinking of dishes filling the comfortable silence. "Tom's lucky to have you, Sarah," he said quietly, rinsing a plate. "This house feels like a real home." It was a simple compliment, but the way he said it, the quiet sincerity in his voice, resonated. It wasn't flattery. It felt like an observation. I mumbled a thank you, feeling an unexpected warmth spread through me. Later, after Tom had drifted off to sleep in his chair, a nightly ritual, Mark and I sat in the living room, the only light coming from the dim lamp beside me. He was nursing a small glass of whiskey Tom had poured him, swirling the amber liquid, seemingly lost in thought. The rain had stopped, and the only sound was the gentle ticking of the grandfather clock in the hall. I wasn't sure what to say, the earlier ease replaced by a slight awkwardness. He looked up, catching my eye. "It's peaceful here," he said, his voice low. "Out west, it's different. Always moving, always loud." We talked then, not about anything profound, just about the quiet hum of life, the changing seasons, the books we liked. He had a surprising love for classic literature, something I adored but Tom found boring. We discussed authors, characters, the way words could build entire worlds. It was easy, comfortable, yet charged with a subtle undercurrent I couldn't quite name. It wasn't flirting, not at all, but it was connection. A meeting of minds that felt rare and surprising. When I finally said goodnight and headed upstairs, leaving him looking out at the darkened garden, I felt strangely unsettled, yet lighter than I had in months. The predictable quiet of the house suddenly felt different, charged with possibility. Saturday dawned bright and clear, a welcome contrast to the previous evening's drizzle. The sunlight streamed into the kitchen, illuminating dust motes dancing in the air. Tom was already up, dressed in his usual weekend attire, worn jeans and a flannel shirt, making coffee and talking animatedly about taking Mark to see the old covered bridge just outside town, a local landmark steeped in history and teenage memories. Mark emerged looking refreshed, dressed simply in jeans and a gray t-shirt, his blue eyes seeming even brighter in the morning light. He greeted us both with a warm smile, accepting a mug of coffee with genuine appreciation. Over breakfast, pancakes and bacon, a weekend staple, the easy camaraderie from the night before returned. Mark seemed genuinely interested in the covered bridge idea, asking Tom questions about its construction and local lore. I found myself watching Mark more than I probably should have. It wasn't just his thoughtful gaze or the way silver threaded his dark hair. It was the way he listened, truly listened, not just waiting for his turn to speak. He seemed present in a way that felt increasingly rare. After breakfast, the men headed out, leaving me with the quiet house again. But this time, the quiet didn't feel empty. It felt expectant. I busied myself with chores, tidying up, planning dinner, but my mind kept drifting back to the conversations from the night before, the unexpected ease I felt talking to Mark. When they returned a couple of hours later, their faces flushed from the crisp autumn air, they were laughing about some shared memory the bridge had evoked. Tom seemed energized, happier than I'd seen him in a while, clearly enjoying reconnecting with his cousin. While Tom settled in to watch a football game, citing the need to recover from their historical expedition, Mark wandered into the kitchen where I was starting to prep vegetables for dinner. "Need any help?" he asked, leaning against the counter. "Only if you're good at peeling potatoes," I replied, handing him a peeler and a bowl. We worked in companionable silence for a few minutes, the rhythmic scrape of the peelers a soothing sound. Then he started asking about my gardening again, not just the roses this time, but the vegetable patch, the herbs I grew. He didn't just ask polite questions. He seemed genuinely curious about the process, the satisfaction of growing things yourself. He mentioned he tried container gardening on his small balcony back home, but hadn't had much luck. We talked about soil composition, sunlight, the frustrations of pests, mundane topics, perhaps, but the conversation flowed effortlessly. He shared a funny story about a disastrous attempt at growing tomatoes that ended with more squirrels than fruit enjoying the harvest. I laughed, picturing it, and shared my own tale of battling aphids on my prized peppers. It was in these simple moments, sharing everyday experiences and frustrations, that the connection deepened. It wasn't dramatic or sudden. It was a quiet unfolding, like a flower opening petal by petal in the warmth of the sun. Later that afternoon, while rummaging in the attic for an old photo album Tom wanted to show Mark, I stumbled upon a box of Emily's childhood drawings. Mark, who had followed me up the creaky attic stairs ostensibly to help, picked one up. A colorful, chaotic crayon drawing of our family, stick figures with impossibly wide smiles. He studied it for a moment, a soft smile playing on his lips. "She's got your eyes," he said, glancing at me. It was a simple observation, but it landed with surprising intimacy. Looking at that drawing, standing amidst the dusty relics of our past, a wave of nostalgia washed over me, mingled with a strange awareness of the present moment, of Mark standing so close, sharing this glimpse into our family history. Downstairs, looking through the photo albums, Tom narrated the pictures with gusto, pointing out awkward teenage phases and forgotten family trips. Mark listened intently, but occasionally his eyes would meet mine across the album, a silent acknowledgement passing between us, of time past, of memories made, of the people we had become. There was no impropriety, nothing Tom could possibly notice or misconstrue, yet the air between Mark and me felt charged, alive with unspoken understanding. As the afternoon wore on, the subtle tension I'd felt the night before returned, humming beneath the surface of casual conversation and shared laughter. It wasn't uncomfortable, but it was undeniably there, a heightened awareness, a sense that this weekend was shifting something within me, nudging me out of my comfortable predictability in ways I hadn't anticipated. Dinner was roast chicken this time, another crowd pleaser. The conversation flowed easily, filled with Tom and Mark's shared history, but punctuated by those fleeting glances, those shared moments of understanding between Mark and me. I felt engaged, alive, participating not just as Tom's wife and hostess, but as myself, Sarah, connecting with someone who seemed to see beyond the roles I usually played. The day had been filled with simple activities, yet it felt significant, laying the groundwork for something deeper, something I couldn't yet define but felt unfolding with a quiet certainty. Saturday evening settled upon the house like a soft blanket. Dinner was cleared away, and Tom, content after a good meal, and reconnecting with Mark, decided to turn in early, pleading a busy Sunday ahead. Yard work wouldn't do itself, he'd mumbled good-naturedly. The familiar sounds of him getting ready for bed drifted downstairs, taps running, the floorboards creaking overhead, leaving Mark and me alone again in the living room's warm glow. The television was off, the only sounds the rhythmic ticking of the clock and the occasional sigh of the house settling. Mark had poured himself another small measure of whiskey, and I'd made myself a cup of chamomile tea. We sat in comfortable silence for a while, him in the armchair opposite the sofa where I curled my feet up. The easy conversation of the afternoon seemed to have paused, replaced by a contemplative quiet. It wasn't awkward, though. It felt respectful, as if we both sensed a shift in the atmosphere now that Tom wasn't there. Mark finally broke the silence, his voice soft. "Tom seems really happy, Sarah. Content. You've built a good life here." He wasn't looking at me, but swirling the whiskey in his glass, his gaze distant. "We have," I agreed, my voice equally quiet. "It's comfortable, stable." The word hung in the air. Comfortable, stable, predictable. Was that all? He looked up then, his blue eyes meeting mine across the space. "Is comfortable enough?" The question wasn't an accusation, nor was it flirtatious. It was genuinely curious, probing gently beneath the surface. It mirrored questions I'd sometimes asked myself in the dead of night, questions I'd quickly pushed away. "Isn't it supposed to be?" I countered, trying to keep my tone light, but my voice wavered slightly. He didn't press. Instead, he shifted topic, asking about my old dream of opening a small bookstore cafe, something I'd mentioned briefly years ago, something even Tom sometimes forgot about amidst the practicalities of life. I was stunned he remembered. We talked about that dream, about the passion I'd once had for literature, for creating a space where people could connect over books and coffee. I hadn't spoken about it with such enthusiasm in years. Mark listened, truly listened, asking insightful questions, offering gentle encouragement, sharing his own experiences of career changes and chasing seemingly impractical dreams. He spoke about his own life, the pressures of his tech job, the transient nature of relationships on the West Coast, a surprising loneliness that sometimes crept in despite his outward success. He wasn't complaining. He was simply sharing, being vulnerable in a way that invited vulnerability in return. We talked for hours, it seemed. The clock ticked on, unnoticed. We moved from dreams and careers to fears and regrets, sharing pieces of ourselves we usually kept hidden. There was an intimacy in that conversation that transcended the physical. It was a meeting of souls, a recognition of shared humanity, of the complexities and quiet longings that lie beneath the surface of everyday life. At one point, talking about a particularly difficult period after my mother passed away, tears welled in my eyes. I quickly tried to blink them away, embarrassed. Mark didn't say anything platitudinous. He simply reached across the small space separating us and gently rested his hand over mine where it lay on the sofa cushion. His touch was brief, just a few seconds, warm and reassuring. It wasn't romantic or suggestive. It was purely comforting, a gesture of empathy that spoke volumes. In that moment, the connection between us solidified. It wasn't about desire in the conventional sense. It was about being seen, truly seen, and understood on a level I hadn't experienced in a very long time, maybe ever. It was a profound emotional resonance, unexpected and incredibly powerful. The climax of the weekend wasn't a dramatic event, but this quiet, unfolding intimacy, this shared vulnerability under the lamplight. It was the realization that connection could take surprising forms, that you could feel deeply understood by someone you barely knew, someone who was, by definition, just passing through. We didn't solve each other's problems or declare undying feelings. We simply shared a space, a moment in time, where masks were lowered and true selves were glimpsed. When we finally did say goodnight, standing awkwardly in the hallway, there was a shared understanding, a mutual respect for the boundary crossed, not physically, but emotionally. "Thank you, Sarah," he said, his voice husky. "For the conversation, for everything." "Thank you, Mark," I replied, meeting his gaze. Upstairs, lying in bed beside a gently snoring Tom, sleep eluded me. My mind replayed the conversation, the shared laughter, the moments of quiet understanding, the brief, comforting touch of his hand. Nothing illicit had happened, yet everything felt different. The comfortable quiet of my life had been stirred, not unpleasantly, but profoundly. A window had been opened, letting in fresh air, revealing possibilities I hadn't considered, feelings I hadn't known I was capable of. The weekend wasn't over yet, but I knew, deep down, that its impact would linger long after Mark drove away. Sunday morning arrived too quickly, carrying with it the inevitable feeling of an ending. The sky was a brilliant, cloudless blue, mocking the quiet melancholy settling in my chest. Breakfast was a slightly more subdued affair than the day before. Tom was preoccupied with his list of yard chores, Mark was packing his car, and I was trying to act normal, pouring coffee and making small talk while my mind felt miles away. The easy camaraderie was still there, but underlined now with the knowledge of Mark's imminent departure and the unspoken depth of the previous night's conversation. Mark thanked Tom profusely for his hospitality, clapping him on the back. They exchanged promises to stay in touch more often, the kind of promises easily made and often forgotten, but tinged with sincerity this time. Then Mark turned to me. He took my hand, not just a brief shake this time, but holding it for a moment, his gaze steady and filled with warmth. "Sarah," he said, his voice low and earnest, "thank you, truly, for making me feel so welcome, and for the conversation." I squeezed his hand back, unable to find adequate words. "Drive safe, Mark. It was good having you." The farewell wasn't tearful or dramatic. It was quiet, respectful, acknowledging the unexpected connection we'd formed without needing to label it or make it more than it was. Watching his car pull away from the curb, disappearing down the street, I felt a pang, a sense of something significant concluding. Tom came up behind me, wrapping an arm around my shoulders. Well, that was nice, wasn't it? Good old Mark. Doesn't seem to have changed much. I leaned into Tom's familiar embrace, a wave of affection washing over me, mingled with the new awareness Mark's visit had sparked. "No," I said softly. "It was really nice." The rest of the day unfolded in its usual Sunday rhythm. Tom tackled the yard work with gusto. I did some laundry, read the paper, and later we took a quiet walk around the neighborhood as the afternoon light began to fade. The comfortable silence between us felt different, though. Before, it had sometimes felt like a void. Now it felt like space. Space filled with my own thoughts, reflections, and a newfound sense of self. Mark's visit hadn't magically solved anything or revealed some deep dissatisfaction with my life or marriage. Tom was a good man, and our life together was good, built on years of shared history and genuine affection. But Mark, in his brief stay, had reminded me of parts of myself I'd let lie dormant: the dreamer, the passionate reader, the person capable of deep, intellectual connection. He hadn't offered an escape, but rather a mirror, reflecting back a version of Sarah I hadn't seen clearly in a while. The experience was unexpected, yes, but profoundly enriching. It showed me that emotional intimacy could blossom in surprising places, that connection wasn't limited to romantic partners or lifelong friends. It was about being open, being present, and allowing yourself to be truly seen. There was a subtle tension, yes, but it resolved not into conflict or transgression, but into a deeper understanding of myself and my own capacity for connection. In the days and weeks that followed, the house settled back into its quiet routine. Tom returned to his recliner. Emily called from college. The seasons continued to turn. But something within me had shifted. I started visiting the library more, picked up books I'd been meaning to read for years. I even started sketching out rough plans for that little bookstore cafe, not with any concrete intention of opening it tomorrow, but just allowing myself to dream again, to nurture that part of myself. The memory of that weekend, of those conversations under the lamplight, didn't fade. It became a quiet touchstone, a reminder of the depth and richness that can lie beneath the surface of a comfortable life, a reminder that personal growth often comes from unexpected encounters. It wasn't about Mark, not really. It was about the Sarah he helped me rediscover. And for that, I would always be grateful. The weekend my husband's cousin stayed was indeed one I wouldn't forget, not because of some scandalous event, but because of the quiet, profound way it reopened my own heart and mind.